Thank you, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Storytellers interview series. I am joined today by one of our members, Rachel Preston-Prinz. Rachel, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. And today we're here to talk to you about 2 projects that you're working on here in New Mexico. We have documentary project Emergence, Sky City Cultural Center, and Bandelier, Reclaiming Home. So kind of 2 of our northern New Mexico monuments and preserves that you're really focusing on. So we're really excited to talk to you about your work. I wanted to start with kind of how did you become involved with these particular projects?
So it's kind of a funny background story, actually. I am actually trained as a historic architect.
Interesting.
And that's really has been my career, has been in architecture for the past 20 years. And when I got to New Mexico 10 years ago or so, I just came with a very different point of view about what I was doing. I wanted it to be more meaningful. And I landed in New Mexico, and I didn't really realize how powerful architecture here was going to affect, how powerfully I would be affected by it. And then I started a project in Taos where I documented 500 or so houses, and I started to really get an appreciation for the earth architecture that we had here, and I became very curious about it. And so I started studying it. And somewhere along the way, I got this sort of audacious idea that I thought that we should make a documentary television series for New Mexico PBS about the history of our architecture.
Nice.
And I knew that I didn't have any skills whatsoever, and that I would need to develop some of those if I was going to pitch this idea to PBS. Because I mean, of course, why wouldn't they take this great idea? And because I do know what I'm talking about.
Right.
I just didn't have any skills at all. So I ended up moving down to Albuquerque for a project, and for a preservation project. And I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to go and hang out with the guys at UPublic and work on their live morning show, which they were doing at that time. And then that way I can learn how to start filming my TV show.
Right.
And actually, I did that for a year, and it was the most incredible experience. I met the most amazing people, and I got to work every aspect of the show, or work with people who were working on every aspect of the show. And at this time, the idea had still not gelled in my mind, how I was going to make all this happen. I just knew that I needed to start developing some skills. And I started taking classes, and then as I met people, I would take more and more classes, and they would tell me which rabbit hole to go down to learn how to do this. And I started working on a couple movies, and I decided, what I really need to do is I need to shoot a pilot, because if I have a pilot, then I can show them what I want to do, right? And even though I never ever meant to step in front of the camera, we ended up shooting the pilot with the idea that I was going to be acting as the principal. So some friends and I, filmmaking friends and I, went to 3 different sites in New Mexico and Arizona. We went to Los Poblanos in Albuquerque, beautiful early 20th century historic traditional villa is what I would call it.
Yeah.
And we filmed there, and we interviewed those guys. They're amazing, and they were very gracious with us, considering I had no credentials, right, except for architecture. So they let me in the door, and I had no idea what I was doing, but thankfully I had people who did. And right, and then that opened the door for me to take my team, and we went and we shot at La Posada in Winslow, Arizona.
Oh yeah.
Mary Coulter building. So at that point we're focusing on 20th century architecture, because that's what really, honestly, that's what I knew the most about. And then I just so happened to be very good friends with the architect of the Sky City Cultural Center, which is the new cultural center at Acoma Pueblo at the base of the mesa. So for those that don't know, Acoma Pueblo is up on a 200-foot mesa, and it's been there for so many generations. It's at least 600 years.
Yeah.
And it's just this amazing, very special place. And so I went to my friend about her project there, which is a modern building, but it builds on all of the traditional architecture. And I said, I have this crazy idea. Would you let me film? And maybe you could bring Brian, who was one of the people from Acoma who worked for her when she was designing this. And at this point, he was just someone who was very involved with the Pueblo and knew art and architecture stuff. And it turns out now he's the governor of the Pueblo. So really, it was really incredible to get to witness all of that. That's a whole nother amazing story. But I said, can we talk to Brian about this? Because it's something I really think would be a really cool idea to talk about modern architecture and how it can reflect back on the past and teach us lessons about why that matters. So they actually agreed to let us come film and interview them at the cultural center.
Right.
So we get to the cultural center and we had one day set aside for filming. I mean, we didn't have any budget. This is literally a duct tape and baling wire operation. Like we were buying our own granola bars. Like it was like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And because it was just an idea at the time.
Right.
And I was using my regular architectural preservation work to fund it at that point. And so we got there and Brian was like, you really ought to interview some of our grandmothers who have helped work on these buildings, and they're potters and they know all of our traditions. And how amazing would it be if we could get, them to speak? And I thought, oh, well, that's great. And the director of the museum was also from Acoma, and he wanted to speak. And so we ended up spending this day out there filming. And it was amazing because we didn't really know. So we thought we were shooting a pilot. So at best, it was going to be 44 minutes, 3 segments, 11 minute, roughly.
Yeah.
We were starting to figure out how that would time in. Excuse me. And then we got back to the editing suite, and my editor starts digging in on it because there's something about this thing. It was just like, it was vibrating. You just knew that there was something really special here. We were all completely consumed with it. And she starts going through the film, and it was unbelievable. She looked over at me. It wasn't even 5 minutes after going into the film. She's got, her eyes are welled up with tears.
Wow.
And she's like, Rachel, there's a story here. And I said, really? I was like, what's this going to look like? And I had it all lined out, all the shots I wanted to give,
right,
and all the things, And it was really interesting because I had lined it out perfectly to have all the pieces we need, just in the wrong order because I didn't know, the story hadn't revealed itself yet.
Right.
And so we did have all the pieces we needed, and it was just a joy to put together. We spent a lot of time, probably 6 months, just loving that.
Wow.
And with no money. That they agreed to do this with no money, just heart. And then we showed it to Acoma, and they liked it. And they really did. And they thought it was a good start. And they said, well, it's 44 minutes. Can you that's what we ended up. So we were aiming for a segment of a 44-minute show. We ended up with a 44-minute documentary that wasn't going to be one segment. But we showed it to them, and they said, that's really cool. We'd love to show it in our visitor center. Can you cut it down to 30 minutes? And we said, well, absolutely, we can do that. Which is heartbreaking, it's always so hard to cut your baby.
Yes, yeah.
And that was the first time we'd gone through the whole editing process to really tell a story. And it just turned out that we had some really beautiful stories in there, not just about architecture, but about the way that they grew up. The way that the grandmothers in there had grown up, and the way that they were taught their pottery making traditions. And we just knew that it was more powerful than we ever anticipated. And then it sort of started to come together where I ended up becoming pretty good friends with one of the Grammys that we interviewed. Actually, both of them are dear to me. And one of them said to me, I really wish we could show this to our kids. I really wish we could develop a curriculum around this so they could learn their architecture. And I looked over at her and I said, well, what does that mean to you? I mean, I'm really interested in that, because it's one thing to make a show. It's another thing to give it back to them. And it's another thing to even pass it on beyond that. And she told me what she wanted. And we ended up cutting it into small sections that were based on the movie and developing a curriculum around it for their students.
Wow.
And then ultimately they gave us permission to put it out on the web and make it available to any student who wanted to learn. And that prompted the idea of starting a nonprofit, which we did, called Architecture for Everybody. And to stretch out this idea from being just 13 episodes that we hope we get to shoot someday, if New Mexico PBS ever looked at us and said, that's a good idea, into we could build these documentaries and then build curriculum around them, and then have a complete curriculum that goes from the beginning of time, of architectural time, to the present, and talks about New Mexico and our architecture and how we've been sustainable for 1,000 years. And it just was such an exciting opportunity. So we ended up becoming a nonprofit, getting sponsored by Rio Grande Community Development, which is now SYNC in South Valley. And it has just been an incredible ride ever since. And every door that opens is just more and more beautiful. And we get to see more collaborations and possibilities than I ever thought possible, with some silly little architecture series that I kind of dreamed up one day.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I really found fascinating as I watched the documentary for the Acoma Sky City Center was how embedded our architecture is in our culture and vice versa. And I don't think we often realize that. Like, to us, we just see buildings, and you know, like when I've been to Chicago versus living here, I obviously notice a difference in the architecture, but I never really translate it to the cultural influence of that architecture. And so I think it's really interesting that you're starting to help people see both of those things. Because I think the more we just understand how our culture influences different aspects of daily lives, the more respect we start to have for our own and others as we enter their communities. Was that something you were expecting to happen when you started making these?
Not really, but it was happening to me when I was making it. So I came from the traditional world of architecture where, I mean, really fundamentally, my last job in Vail, money was no object. We were spending ridiculous amounts of money on gold sinks and all the beautiful details and all of that stuff. So, you know, I had this one idea of what architecture was. And as I got here, and when I came here, I say I came here to play in the dirt, because that's what ultimately ended up happening. I was living in Taos, and the Ranchos Plaza Church in Taos, in Ranchos to Taos, is this stunning little church, and I've always gone there. I just love it. And I found out that they were going to remud. They do this every year, but they were going to do it as a community. And I went to the remudding and to work. It's hard work. It's a long day of hard work, as many days as you're willing to go. And I went for several days. And I watched them peel these layers of these buildings off and then put them back. And there was this really powerful moment when I was working on, you take these sort of flat hose and you run it down the plaster. And if it's ever weak in any place, you kind of work that out so that all the weakness comes out, and it really, the new plaster really sticks to it really well. And I'll never forget, but I was, you know, kind of trying to get this plaster off, and a piece of it fell off, and I could see a handprint.
Oh, wow.
And I put my hand on the handprint, and I realized I was reaching across time. And and then this is a tradition that they do every year, and that they actually call the women golondrinas. It used to be done by women, all the plastering. And they were like little birds, you know, up on the lifts singing. And they were allowed to tell dirty jokes, and that was like a really big deal. And so they wouldn't get in trouble this time of year. As long as they were working on the church, they could be a little playful.
That's great.
And it just, and you start to realize what an incredibly deep culture all of it is. And so that was what was happening to me, and I think it's reflected in the film. Just because I was telling the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So wonderful. So I guess one of the other things that I found interesting about the Acoma people in particular was the way that they found ways to infuse their storytelling as a pueblo into just objects of everyday life with symbols like triangles and what that represents through the stories that they tell. Was it difficult for you to figure out, especially having to cut your documentary down for them to 30 minutes? Was that difficult to kind of showcase those kind of elements of it and to choose what to talk about in your film? Or did it feel like it came together pretty naturally in how you were able to talk about how they use everyday objects in such influential ways to tell the story to their generations?
I think for me, it was very intuitive because that's my nature. I'm a pattern maker. I mean, that's a sort of a fundamental requirement for being involved in architecture.
Right.
And so, or a pattern finder in most cases, because I'm usually reverse engineering a building, because usually it's a historic building that's falling down that we have to do something about. So I'm usually reverse engineering. So I'm always looking for the pattern. So I think that was easy. The harder part was getting buy-in to talk about those things. That traditionally the Puebloans don't really talk about their symbology. And even the things that we think we know, it's almost impossible for us to actually know, because we can say a word, say lightning, and we can have one meaning of what an idea in our minds, what lightning means. But for them, lightning, and actually in all indigenous cultures this is true, for them, lightning not only means the thing that we identify it with on the typical, but it's also connected to a story, which is also connected to the beings that look out for them in their worldview, whether it be stars or whatever. So maybe it's not just lightning, maybe it's also something else. And how to get it to where they were willing to share with us ideas that are important, and that they were willing, to put all over their buildings, but in a way that was really mindful of also honoring that some of this is sacred and isn't meant to be known. That to me was the most beautiful part of our conversations. Especially as I mentioned, I became friends with the two women that we interviewed, and they became like grandmothers to me, because they were so careful in teaching me so that I would respect their understanding and their tradition, but also not telling me so much that I would betray it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it was very, very powerful to me to learn anything about that, but also it made all of it so much more profoundly important to me that the stories need to be told, because so many of us, I think, are looking for meaning in the spaces that we surround ourselves with. And if we understand what it is, we're more likely to take good care. And I just thought that was really important. So it was really an interesting and tricky conversation. And there have been lots of tricky conversations since in moving over to Bandelier, because, and I know we're going to get to talk about that here in a minute.
Yeah.
But the Acoma and the people from Bandelier are fundamentally different people. They're all Puebloans, but Acoma is Western Puebloan, and the tribes that were at Bandelier are Eastern Puebloan for the most part. And so they have different worldviews. We lump them together, but they also have different ideas of what they're willing to share. And sussing out what that is really interesting. And it's a patience requiring, because their version of time and space is parallel to ours, but it's not the same. It doesn't work in the same way. And I respect that. I don't need it to be my way.
Right.
But it has required a different level of acceptance from me than would traditionally be done, when I could just push through and be like, no, we're on a deadline.
Right.
I don't have enough money. Well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in that circumstance.
Right.
Because they've got things they need to do that matter right then.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So,
So you did a wonderful job in the Acoma documentary at using kind of images and footage to show the history of their culture as you showed how those things were honored in this new construction. I'm actually thinking I'm going to play us a segment that I've queued up.
okay.
And actually it's going to be, if I'm not mistaken, I've pulled up, right at when you talk to them about the tradition of pottery.
There's a lot that goes into pottery making. I appreciate that. I learned that from my grandparents. The thing that I've carried on the most is the praying and carrying on the pottery, the art. Her mother and her mother's mother were also potters. So she learned from her mother, and then her mother learned from her mother. And then the everyday chores were get up, go pray, go after water at the windmill over here, bring them back, heat it up, get the wash tub out, wash whatever was dirty from the day before. After you did all that, you put beans on the stove so it can start cooking for dinner. You go outside and you pick the chili and the cilantro, and you come inside, you clean them up, and then after all that, you're so exhausted. Okay, sit down here, help me grind my clay. So you have to grind clay or make her paint, and then you finally get to put your hands in the clay. My grandfather and I will go mine the clay and walk all the way back there with me to show me where to get the paints, different colors. He said, you get this color here, you get this color here. My husband's grinding clay right now. It's got to be sun dried first, and then you soak it in rainwater. Has to be rainwater, not tap water. The tap water has too much alkali in it. Dry it on the ground on a sheet. All the water absorbs into the ground, and then you kind of stir it, and it forms like little cottage cheese. You soak it again, and then it forms smaller, like curds. And then that's when you grind it on the metate. It's ground to the consistency of flour, and I sift it through a screen. I do the pottery shards the same way. I soak them for like 3-4 days, and then you grind them on the metate.
I love that segment because of the footage that you had in there. And I'm wondering, was it difficult for you to resource those kind of images, or did you have an easy time coming across them?
On Acoma, it's pretty easy. It's much harder for other pueblos. So the big deal about Acoma, especially for people who live in Santa Fe, they may not realize it. Acoma is probably, I would say, the most important pueblo of the 20th century in New Mexico. And the reason being is that the School for Advanced Research and its precursors, the School for American Archaeology, was started here. And these are the people who they excavated Machu Picchu, and a lot of the places that we know about in Mexico, and they also were working on saving the mission at Acoma. And so Acoma, almost everybody from Santa Fe, all of the people who were here in archaeology and in historic preservation and architecture went to Acoma to try to preserve this historic church that's up there that is absolutely, San Esteban's very magical. It's a very, very, very special place. And they actually brought ideas from Acoma to Santa Fe. So here's something most people don't know. When you're looking at the Palace of the Governors, on the west side of the Palace of the Governors is the New Mexico Museum of Art. That is a direct copy of Acoma's church and convent with other mission churches' facades placed on all the ends. But it is a copy of Acoma. And there are all different kinds of buildings around town that can be like, oh, there's an Acoma tower, and there's an Acoma overhang, and there's an Acoma this, and there's an Acoma window. And it's because it was just really, it was a big deal then, and it's still a big deal. So Edward Curtis had done a lot of photography out there. And so it was easy to get photography that was really high caliber. I mean, that's really what makes this. I mean, we're so lucky that we were able to piece something together that was really surprising, and anywhere near as good as it was, considering that it was literally the GoPro taped to the top of the car with duct tape and all that. So yeah, I was shocked at how we were able to tell a fairly complete story with really what was supposed to be 11 minutes. You know?
And those water carriers, I mean, God, those women, I thought, look at what they're doing every day. I just found it so fascinating. And it made me, as much as I've spent time up there, you know, I've lived in New Mexico since I was like 5 years old. So I've trampled around the whole state, and I've gone to places multiple times. And I love, like I was telling you before we got started, I love northern New Mexico and a lot of the cultural preserves that are still up there, especially from our tribe populations. And I was just all of a sudden, I was like, there's so much more I need to go back to Acoma for now, you know? So if you haven't been there, there'll be links to this in our YouTube notes. Please.
And you'll want to go now.
And yes, and make sure you go. And if you've been there, I think it's worth kind of going a few times more, because I think that this culture in particular has a lot of hidden treasures that you still probably come across every time you go back. I want to share a little bit more of the documentary that just does a little bit of the new center and kind of how they embedded the storytelling into the architecture of the new center. So
we only tell stories during the winter. We don't tell it during the summer.
I remember my grandfather, that's when he told our stories, you know, during winter months when it was boring, you know, like, what do you do? Go to bed early? And I was always remembering that too when I make my storyteller figurines, you know, how my grandfather sat there and, or they would sing to us. They would sing songs to us, or, you know, the stories. My dad was the last one to tell stories to my, to us, to me and my siblings. But as far as that, I think that's where it ended.
When we first opened, we had storytelling in the evening, and we had the fireplace going. We served parched corn, pinos, and Indian tea. And first night, a lot of students came. And it was so funny. We thought they would be afraid to tell, you know, stories. And they were the main ones, you know, I want to tell a story. They were coyote stories and different animal stories. So then I guess the elders heard about it. So the next time we had it, it was the elders that came and they started telling the stories. So it was so much fun. Now I'm trying to tell my son. The other day at breakfast, I said, okay, it's still winter. I can tell you this little folk tale over breakfast. So I was telling him about the boy and the eagle. But I would love to record them, and then maybe during winter time, have the children listen to them. And I think that's another way of remembering those folk tales or stories about the land, the animals, how we lived together with the animals, and then also the plants.
When you look at the layout of the cultural center courtyard or plaza, you're also getting a sense of what it looks like up on top.
The east and west sides protect from the wind, and so the north side's enclosed. We live in such a great solar climate. The south side of the building is warming up. It's a thermal mass, and then we've got the windows to let the light in.
Most of the time, we have traditional Acoma dances that are performed.
They're dancing in deerskin moccasins, so screening the soil in order to remove pebbles and gravel was really important.
From the plaza, you can get a feel for some of the other architectural details and commissioned work that was awarded to tribal members. You can see the pottery chimneys, the kiva ladders, the parapets, the carved beams, and the monumental sculpture.
I am a big proponent that everyone should have pottery chimneys now that I saw.
Amen, right?
So
Are they
beautiful.
gorgeous?
Yeah.
I love them.
What a
I
lovely
love
way to just put a little topper on it. I had no idea that that was the purpose for that.
Well, and
Really
here's
wonderful.
the secret. Those are pots that broke in the fire.
Oh, okay. So then the reuse and repurpose, I loved that about that culture. It's implied even in just this short documentary about how much they recycle, reuse, repurpose everything that they come across so that I can think almost minimize their footprint. It's really interesting how traditional that is for them and still is. I just love it.
It is. And I think my very favorite thing about that doc is that we were able to weave together a story that's all in their words.
Yes.
We say anything at 3 times. We change the story and we tell you where the story is going now. And those are the only words that anybody who was not involved with that project say. And I just think that is so cool that they get to choose what they wanted to say. And it was just really powerful. I almost felt like I witnessed it more than I made it happen.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. It really, I do have to tell you, it was not only well produced as a documentary. I enjoyed watching it very much. I'm a person, if I'm not watching movies from 1937, I'm watching documentaries more than I watch anything current. But so I loved it, even just as a short documentary. But it's so authentic. And I think that's what I appreciated about it, is it really showcased a true respect for the Acoma Pueblo and the people that have, I mean, how long has it been there?
1,000 years.
1,000 years. Yeah. I mean, to sustain generations for that long. I'm so excited to hear some of those ladies talking about ways to bring the storytelling back to the winter so they don't lose that, you know.
Did you see me get all emotional? Every time she says that, I cry. I'm like, oh my gosh. If I had endless money.
Yes, I would love to help her. Let's help that lady get those stories recorded. I think that is something that is a huge service to that community for generations. So I was so glad to hear that they're finding ways to keep their storytelling. So yeah, Emergence Sky City Cultural Center. I'll put the link in our YouTube notes, and we also have a link to the website where the curriculum that it spawned is also available. We'll put that in there as well. If you've never been up to this area, you must go see it. I know with COVID-19 right now, I don't know what's all available and open, but keep an eye on it. When you find out that it's safe to go up and take a look, it's well worth even a day trip in New Mexico to go spend some time up there. And I really recommend checking out the new cultural center because
it's beautiful.
You'll learn in the documentary, but every single detail is really considerate of the Acoma people. I mean, really just a beautiful, beautiful building. I loved the cloud piercing ladder. You guys will learn about that in the documentary. I loved it. And I'm excited to go back up to that area now that I got to watch this again this morning. So let's talk a little bit about your other project where now you're kind of, it seems like doing something similar, but up in our Bandelier community. It's going to be called Bandelier Reclaiming. Is that what, do I have it right? Yeah, Reclaiming Home, correct?
Reclaiming Home.
So tell us a little bit about how this one came about and what you're going to be focusing on.
So this one was a natural outgrowth of Acoma. And because it was sort of starting to tell the story of Indigenous architecture in New Mexico, that was going to be the first part of the, I guess, series that I wanted to release was something that was Indigenous. I also have one that's working with Navajo architecture. That's
nice.
In my someday plans.
Yeah.
But we had an opportunity to go work with the Historic Preservation Division at at Bandelier National Monument. And for those that don't know, Bandelier is right outside Los Alamos, really. Yeah. And interestingly, there are 2 pieces to Bandelier that are actually different tribes. One of them was the one that we go to that's the main event at Bandelier is the precursor pueblo to Cochiti.
Oh.
And the other part of it, it's a little closer to White Rock, called Sanqui, and that's a precursor pueblo to San Ildefonso Pueblo.
All right.
And so both of these sites are roughly 600 years old. They are cave houses. They originally started out as cave structures, and then they were expanded over time to be more of house-like or multi-room structures. You've probably seen photographs of them. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
They're very special. And the really cool thing about them is that they are oriented such that they gather the sun in the winter when they need to be warm, and they shed the sun in the summer when they need to be cool. And it's just an incredible, there are these incredible buildings, and you can actually go climb through the caves at both sites. They're open to visitors. But we just wanted to have an opportunity to chat about those with the thing that gets really interesting here is we use the same principle that we did at Acoma, but this time, instead of talking to elders, we're actually talking to the young people. And what's really cool is the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps has put together a group of young people from those pueblos, mainly actually from San Ildefonso Pueblo, also Española, and a little bit of Santa Clara. And they are taking the kids back out to Bandelier National Park and working with the Park Service staff to teach them how to restore their ancestral homelands.
Wow.
And so they're the kids get paid, they get a summer internship, and they get skills that they can take back to the pueblos that are very, very, very difficult to get now and very expensive because there's so few people who know how to mud anymore.
Right.
And it's a solid day's work. It's a hard day's work to do all that. You know, it's a real job. So anyway, so there are these young people, college age, mostly freshmen and sophomores in college, and they come back many of them come back every summer and do this program, and they're very literally rebuilding those pueblos. And reclaiming their ancestral knowledge, and reclaiming those spaces. Several of them have gone to get hired by the Park Service to run those programs. So it's just this incredible thing that's happening that nobody knows about out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Where indigenous people are reclaiming their space, and also reclaiming their traditions. And I just think it's really beautiful.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited.
Amazing to hear, because I think that's what a lot of people fear the most about our indigenous cultures is they're so even just kind of ignored, that what happens with that history, and to not think that history isn't part of all of our history, and influential to all of us is just, kind of silly to me. And so the value in understanding these cultures that have been here for so long and have cared so much for the New Mexico lands, and really integrated the way they live in New Mexico. I mean, my goodness, there's just so much for all of us to learn. And so I think it's so important that you're highlighting these things.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from, a lot of my, especially it starts with my friends, right? Because these are the things I hear about all the time.
Right.
Oh, I want to build my own house. Oh, I want to build an earth ship. Oh, I want to do these things. I want to live a sustainable life. I want to have my own farm. I want, all these things that we want to do to live better lives,
right,
in alignment with our values and live sustainably. And the knowledge that these people had. So when they moved here, the Eastern Band Pueblos are mostly from Mesa Verde. The Western Band Pueblos are mostly from Chaco-ish.
Right.
So the reason that they came here was that they were escaping a drought. And they got here and they realized that they could harness the water and the wind and the sun and all of these things and make these places livable. So our fundamental understanding of sustainability starts there.
Right.
with looking at societies that have lived for 1,000 years and made it in very difficult circumstances. New Mexico is not an easy place, but they make it, and they have continued to make it. And it's because they adapted their agriculture and they adapted their water retaining and all those things. But I wanted to start with them because they've done it for so long that we've sort of been like, oh, well, we have newfangled buildings and we have mechanical systems, and so we can overrule all of that.
Right.
But then the power goes out and we learn the hard way that no, we can't.
Yeah, absolutely. We all get stuck at home all of a sudden in quarantine and we start realizing how much our homes don't accommodate us.
Really?
Yeah.
That's such a valuable lesson that I've definitely learned. And it's just, to me, it's one of the fundamental building blocks. And to be able to tell their story and to tell it from their point of view is just so much more powerful than just saying, oh, but this is how we should build. Why?
Yeah.
There's a 1,000-year tradition. Let me show you.
Right. Here's the value in it. That's great. So for the Bandelier project, what stage of development are you at? And has the whole COVID-19 thing kind of shut down or prevented you from getting further on that project?
Bandelier is on hold. We can't film there right now. They opened last week.
Okay.
2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. But summertime is not really when you want to shoot at Bandelier. There's too many people. So we accept that. And so currently we are working with the interviews that we did of the young people. And we're editing. And we're seeing how much of a story we have there, so we'll know how far we're going to be able to take it with what we've got so far. It's possible that we'll need to go back and get some more film, but I would anticipate that if we did, we'd do it all in one day. Because we're very close. We have a substantial enough story just with those kids. I mean, I could make a whole movie just about them.
Right. What kind of support do you most need to kind of help your projects move forward that you've been working on?
Definitely need financial support. You know, I've kind of run out of friends willing to help for free. I've tried to, you know, I mean, and people are always willing to help, but you have to have some consistency across these things to make them really work. That was one of the hard lessons of setting up a nonprofit. I know lots of my architect friends have this idea of, oh, I'm going to run a nonprofit in my regular firm. And I'm always like, no, don't do that. Reporting and grant writing and all that stuff ends up becoming all that you do. So we're definitely looking for partners. I still would love to get some more money together and maybe a little bit more, an editor or two on board where we could really kind of plow through this. I think we have enough. Sort of manpower at this point, or woman power, because we actually both my movies are like all women.
That's so great.
So not intentionally. There was a guy that helped on the filming. I should give him credit, but for the vast majority of everything that's been done, it's been all women supporting each other, which is part of the reason why I love women in film. Because this is how you develop your girl power circles, you know.
That's right.
And so as of right now, I think money and time are definitely the things that we're looking for the most. But also, I really want to take this. If anybody knows anybody at New Mexico PPS, I have friends over there, but I've never been brave enough to show them any of this. So. Because I'm going to be honest, I want to do this because I really want people to know this. Like a lot of, I'm looking in the camera. A lot of what I did was my friends pointing me to YouTube channels that taught you how to do things. And like, we did this so, like, if you really have a dream of what you want to create, like, you can learn the basics of it and then go find the people who can help you hone your craft.
Right.
And I want to encourage people to not be afraid of not having the tools. I mean, if you only have an iPhone, I want you to still go practice making movies.
Yes.
Because that's how we get it done. And nobody is going to back you as an investor if you don't have something to show for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't have something to show them that says, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get this done, there's nothing in it for them to judge on. But if you have something to show them, they really can see where you're coming from, and if it's a heart thing, and if their hearts respond to that. And that's where I've got a lot of my support, is when it touches people's hearts.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. And that's so true, especially for those of you that are looking at and trying to figure out how to talk to venture capitalists or investors. You know, they are visually in need of presentation, right? You're not going to sell them with just your elevator pitch. So, you know, that might get you in the door, but then they really need to visually see that you've already committed to a path for the story or the product or whatever it is that you're trying to put forward into the world with their help. You have to help them visualize it. Having a good trailer can help you get there, you know?
A treatment's essential.
Yes.
They really want you to understand that you know where you're going and that you know what your audience is. It's just like getting a book deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to have a book plan. And this in the movies, you have to have a movie plan or a documentary plan or whatever you want to call it. We call them treatments. But, you know, it's just a place. I'm just so thankful for the people who helped me get mine done, because it's a hard process to go through, especially if you're not sort of initiated into it. I didn't know who to ask.
Right.
And that's the other thing that's really amazing about women in film, is that if you go to a cocktail hour or a lecture or whatever, these women will become your people, and they will help you connect the dots till you get to the place that you want to be, and that you get in front of the people that you need to be in front of, and you can ask the questions that you have. It's so important to build your community and to participate, because you just wouldn't believe how much easier it gets when you have people behind you.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a village, as it were, to make a movie.
That is not a joke. That is not a joke.
That's great. So anything else about your work that you'd like to share with our audience before we go today?
I'm just super excited. I'm actually, I'm excited to see where the Bandelier takes us. I've got some other film that I mentioned for the pilot that I just have decided, I'm like, I think we're going to actually do something with this now.
Good.
So there's a couple more stories that are probably going to be coming soon.
Excellent.
Even if they're just tiny little things.
Yeah.
And really, on a fundamental level, it also goes in with something else that's happening in my life. I'm getting ready to write another book on New Mexico architecture, and it's going to be called The Spirit Seeker's Guide to New Mexico Architecture.
Nice.
Because there are so many places here that will speak to your soul. And I know a lot of us are really stuck right now and looking for places to escape, even just for a few minutes by ourselves, if that's all we can get, and try to find our little places of sanctuary. And I think it's really important that we do that. So I want to encourage people, because there are places that are public. Los Poblanos is a great example in Albuquerque. They have a public store, and they have fabulous restaurants and a bar there. So when things start to open back up, but even if they don't open back up and you just go to the store and you just walk through the lavender fields, you know, it's just, and there's going to be a pheasant and a peacock and like, it just takes, or they have a beautiful lily pond out front.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just like, I want to encourage people to find their space, whatever that is, to be okay, because we're in a really rough time, and we're probably not going to be out of a rough time for a minute. So I just, that's my goal, is that I've recommitted to doing more of this, because I really want to encourage people to take care of themselves and to do the things that matter.
Yeah. And, you know, as we tell our history, we help like better prepare for our future. So making sure that we understand all these roots of where our culture and society in this area have come from will only make us stronger and better decision makers as we move forward. So thank
Agreed.
Rachel for bringing these
You're
lovely
welcome.
projects to everybody's attention. We're going to have information in our show notes about all of your project links, ways to get in touch with you, so that if we do have all those great people out there that want to invest and see more work like this come to the forefront, they can connect with you and help make that happen. Thank
Awesome.
you again so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And everybody, please stay tuned for episode 3 of Storytellers, which will be coming out soon. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're on all of them. And most importantly, subscribe and ding the little bell here on YouTube so that you get reminders when we release new information.